So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Shaw. I'm the project manager for the Vicksburg District. Thank you so much for coming to the public meeting for the Pearl River Flood Risk Management Project. Just a little bit of background here. We've got some sign-up lists that are out in the foyer. We would ask if it's okay with you, if you would put your name and address, maybe a contact info. I would ask that you wouldn't put your personal email out there because this will become part of the public record, so to speak. Also, there are some study boards that are out there with some push pins, and if you're okay with doing it, we would appreciate it if you would stick a push pin in that represents the location where you live, because we'd really like to know everybody that's a part of this. So we've got an allotted 2 hours for this meeting, and we are here to collect information. We want to know your feedback, your input with respect to this project. And so there's a lot of value in that to us. So I would just ask if you would, if for some reason we start to run over, there are multiple ways, we'll talk about that, the ways that you could actually leave your feedback or your input. And so with that, I want to kind of go over the rules, what we call rules of engagement, just for a second. So when we get through the presentation, one of the things that will happen is that we will take comments. There are multiple ways that can be done. There's comment cards out in the lobby, and there's a comment box for you to drop those cards in. We will also have the ability for people, if you want to sit down and give your video, if you will, of your comments, then that's absolutely a way to do. And then we also have an email address, and I'll show that in just a little bit. So I would ask that to allow everybody to speak that wants to speak, please limit your comments to about 3 minutes, and that will give everybody the opportunity to provide some input. I would ask that you please be respectful and try to avoid interrupting a panel, a moderator, or somebody who's trying to respond to a comment that you made. So that's for those that are here that are in the auditorium today. We also have this going on via WebEx, so we have a virtual meeting as well. Likewise, the way to input there, and it will be collected, will be part of the chat, where you can actually chat into the WebEx itself. And I would ask that you please refrain from spamming that chat. Multiple people are just getting in, basically saying the same thing, and we'd ask that you not try to not dominate the conversation. So the email address, I'm going to go ahead and give that to you in just a moment. But without further ado, I would like to announce or tell you who the speakers will be today. So with us on your far right would be Robin Colosimo. Robin is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Project Planning and Review, and Policy Review. Beside her is the Vicksburg District Commander, Colonel Christopher Klein. And beside the commander is Leslie Prochaska. Leslie is a plan formulator with the Regional Planning Environment Division South. And so with that, we've kind of covered our housekeeping. So if we will, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So the question everybody is asking, what's on the agenda? Why are we here? Well, we do value the input from the public. The Assistant Secretary of the Army has asked the Corps of Engineers to review a document that was provided by the non-federal interest, and that was something that the Corps has taken on. It was an assignment basically that we were given to try to fill in the blanks that there were in this plan. The things that there were comments that generated, and some could be filled out, completed, some could not. So the meeting purpose is to allow the public, you the public, to speak up and provide us some feedback. The non-federal interest I mentioned, that is the Rankin-Hines Pearl River Flood Control and Drainage District, Flood and Drainage Control District, excuse me. And so one of the things I would point to is that why are we here? Why are we doing what we are? And so there's two authorizations, if you will, that you can see there. First is Section 3104 of the Water Resources Development Act 2007. What that particular section stated is that the Secretary of the Army is authorized to construct the National Economic Development Plan, the Locally Preferred Plan, that's the plan put forth by a non-federal interest or a combination thereof. In Section 1176 of Word of 2018 modifies that and says that we do have to consider downstream effects associated with that project as well. So there is a reason for why we're doing this, and that's the history of the Pearl flooding in the Jackson metro area. As our panelists will talk about, there have been multiple floods there with lots of damage, and they are in desperate need of a flood risk solution. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the non-federal interest provided their draft feasibility study, environmental impact statement. They provided that to the ASA's office, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Mr. Connor. They provided that to him in July of 2022. The ASA's office generated some comments. Most of those comments were resolved. There were still some that were unresolved, and they basically tasked the Corps of Engineers, and particularly the Vicksburg District, with trying to complete and fill in those data gaps that were identified as part of that review. And so, what's next, if you will? So we're collecting your comments. We're collecting the information. We are in the process of filling in those data gaps that I mentioned, and we will provide to the Assistant Secretary of the Army by the end of August. So he'll have it 1st of September. And there will be some follow-on action. The NEPA will be complete in January of 2024. So with that, next slide, please. I've got this slide. Okay. And so here is our schedule for public meetings. So this is the first session of two sessions today here in Slidell. There'll be tomorrow on the 24th, there will be a similar 1 to 6 p.m. session there at the Sparkman Auditorium on Lakeland Drive in Jackson. And so there'll be one follow-on meeting that'll be very similar to this one. There'll be a virtual public meeting that'll happen on the 1st of June, and there'll be a similar 1 to 6 p.m. session. So I mentioned earlier, if you can see at the bottom of the page there are multiple ways that you can provide comments. There are the comment cards out in front. You can drop them in the box. You can use regular mail. It's available, and the address is up on the screen. And then lastly, we have an email that's set up for this project, and you can see it's FRM at USACE.army.mil. And so we have a court reporter who's taking notes, if you will, of the transcription of this meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, and now I would like to reintroduce Ms. Colosimo. Robin is going to speak next with respect to the project importance.
Hi, just a sound check. Can folks hear me? That one is. Hi, as mentioned, I'm Robin Colosimo, and I work in the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works Office. I just want to thank everybody for being both here live and online. We really look forward to working with you all to garner your ideas and your concerns about how to solve these flood risk management problems in Jackson and the Pearl drainage. We know that they've long plagued communities, and it's been decades in the making to get here today in many ways. When we say I oversee project planning review, anything that comes through the Corps that requires either congressional authorization or appropriation, and then ultimately implementation has to come through our office. And so I have a fundamental responsibility in that process to certify the validity of those reports and those recommendations that come through the Chief of Engineers. So a serious job, but done in collaboration with the Corps to make sure we're checking our responsibilities, both technically and feasibility-wise, right? So that often depends upon where you sit. And from my view, my experience, it's all about it starts with great input and great understanding of the opportunity before us. I do work for Mike Connor, who's our Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, and I want to introduce him via video. He has a short introduction here. He did want to be here, was unable to do that today and tomorrow, but has been on the landscape and will continue to be because this is an important project to advance for him with you all. So with that, can we shoot the video?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. No sound.
And right. Hi everyone, I'm Mike Connor, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. I provide policy oversight and direction for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works program. Thank you for joining us at this community engagement session on solutions to address flooding along the Pearl River in Mississippi. We look forward to hearing from you about your needs and concerns regarding flooding issues and a proposed project to address these challenges. As all of you know, the city of Jackson, Mississippi has experienced devastating flood as recently as 2020 and 2022. I saw firsthand some of this flooding in August of last year in a visit to discuss a proposed project. It is a priority to provide people of Jackson with effective near-term solutions to their flood risks, and we have a tremendous opportunity to deliver these solutions through the bipartisan infrastructure law and funding provided through that mechanism. This administration has set aside sufficient funding to complete planning and implementation of a plan consistent with existing authorities and in compliance with federal environmental laws. Your input today and the final technical report from this effort will inform my decision on the solutions we will implement to reduce flood risk in Jackson. I appreciate your time and input today as we work together to find the best solutions for the Pearl River, Jackson, and this region of Mississippi. Thank you very much for your time.
As a civil servant, I feel honored to work for Mr. Connor for many reasons. He's an important leader with vast experience in solving complex water resources problems at the federal and regional levels. And so for those of you who don't know him, it's important to have him involved in this process. And most notably, he's been in and out of government over the years, including being the Deputy Secretary of Interior in the Obama administration. So we can leverage his experience and understanding about how to see these things to encompass the Corps' responsibilities. As he said, he will ultimately be the decision maker, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute about why that matters here. And he is obviously very interested in engaging you all. Next slide, please. Is this the different? Yeah. Okay, so why are we here? We're here because we want to advance a flood risk management solution after decades of repetitive flooding in Jackson. As you all know, in many cases, probably have experienced, for over 100 years, we have had water flooding in the Pearl River that's caused disruptions to businesses and industry throughout Jackson, Mississippi, affecting more than 5,000 commercial and residential structures, and impacts to a population of over 500,000. The most notable events were in 1979 and 1983, but as Mr. Connor referenced, we're also aware of the ones in 20 and 22. And in fact, I was here with Mr. Connor on a visit as the rains were starting in 22, and it was fascinating to actually have been here and leave the next day and find out what emerged. It felt really important at the time, and continues to be in my mind. In 1979, the event caused more than $223 million in damages in those values. In today's world, that's a very large number when updated. And of course, the highest crest was in 2020, and particularly affected two minority and low-income areas of Jackson. We also recognize the Pearl River has tremendous environmental value, including wetlands that filter waters that eventually flow into the Gulf of Mexico and support thousands of geese, ducks, and migratory birds. For decades, the Corps and non-federal interests have sought to solve the flood risk management problem in Jackson, but a lack of project justification, community support, and funding has stalled meaningful progress. So why do I say that? funding is a really important piece that Mr. Connor mentioned, is that why we're here and the opportunity before us has everything to do with the bipartisan infrastructure law and money being set aside to address these long-stalled issues in Jackson. So we want to look forward to working with you all to solve these problems that have long plagued communities with a view towards what we can do to make things work and take advantage of this tremendous window of opportunity. Next slide, please. In terms of congressional interest, just to make sure we don't get too much into alphabet soup, the Corps of Engineers only undertakes things that Congress gives us authorization and appropriation for. In Pearl, in Jackson in particular, is particularly interesting because we were authorized as the Corps of Engineers as early as 1986 to construct a project to resolve the flood issues that emerged in 1979. In 2007, Congress modified that authorization to plan, design, and ultimately implement a project to allow the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works to make an approval of that plan. And that was what Mr. Connor referred to in his comments. Why does that matter? Because we don't have to go back to Congress if he meets the requirements Congress gave him in that authorization in 2007. In 2018, as referenced, there was also additional direction given to the Secretary that we should make sure that analysis includes any potential downstream impacts, because that had been a voice of concern for many of you over time. So we obviously are very interested in understanding those concerns and making sure we have them fully considered by the Corps. Bottom line up front, we need a plan that we can execute that represents the technical needs and the community needs for flood resilience that meet the standards set by Congress and consistent with environmental laws. So what's now and what's different? I've already said it's a tremendous opportunity that's created by bipartisan infrastructure law. We really want to advance a solution that can happen, and really the big thing is because we have authority and we have appropriations and we can go through a determination process by my boss to determine what should be implemented consistent with those things, we can actually quickly move to design and implementation in ways that has not been able to move forward in the past. So I can't emphasize enough how many communities would like to be in that position. So we're excited to reinvigorate the technical and community work to deliver for Jackson. We look forward to working with all of you, and this is our early engagement to begin that process. And so I know many of you were curious why we were here and what was happening, and this is the initiation of what we intend to be a deliberative and collaborative process. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Colonel Klein to walk through some more detailed slides. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Colonel Chris Klein, the commander of the Vicksburg District and the Pearl River watershed servicing commander, as well as the oversight for this project. And so we know that the Pearl River has a long history of navigation and flood control projects associated with it. And really the story of flood control in Jackson included the initial levee structures that were constructed in 1968. And then in 1979, there was the flood of record. And since then, multiple locally proposed as well as USACE proposed solutions were brought forward for consideration as to how to relieve flooding for the people of Jackson. The latest locally presented project plan was prepared under Section 211 of the Water Resources Development Act of 1996, as were other locally presented plans, all reviewed and presented directly to the Secretary for consideration for implementation. And that brings us to our work of today. So, next slide, please. So what we've been charged to do. Our latest efforts started at the end of last year at the direction of the Secretary. Our mission is to build off of all previous work and develop a report that assesses an array of options for technical feasibility, environmental acceptability, and legal compliance. And right now we have the two most critical items that we're working on now. First is to identify the National Economic Development Plan. So what this is, the National Economic Development Plan, is the plan that has the greatest benefit to meet national economic growth priorities. And that is the plan against which all other plans will be assessed to ensure that the same amount of flood risk mitigation is being provided by those plans, if not equal, then more. The next thing that we have to do is complete our environmental compliance activities. So that, like I mentioned, that NED plan is going to be the baseline against which all alternatives must perform. And each one of those options has to provide as much, if not greater, flood protection in the study area. In addition, our report is also going to take a look at an analysis of comprehensive benefits. These comprehensive benefits are twofold. They're both quantitative and qualitative. So we're going even beyond just the economic numbers to take a look at what benefits each one of the different arrays can provide to the city of Jackson. Just a reminder, the Corps of Engineers and myself, we're neither a proponent or opponent of any one project. What we want to do is we want to deliver flood risk management solutions for the people of Jackson. Now I'd like to turn it over to Leslie, who's going to take us through where we are technically with the project.
Thank you. Leslie Berkoska, plan formulator regionally here in the Mississippi River Valley District Division in the South. So the non-federal interest Rankin Hines prepared the report, and that report did build upon historical studies, as was mentioned. Over 60 different flood reduction features were evaluated and looked at. At the conclusion of that report, 3 plans were identified for further assessment: a non-structural plan, a levee plan, and a channel improvement plan. The non-structural plan consisted of relocating structures and buying the land upon which the structures were located for the 500-year flood event. The levee plan included upgrading existing levees, construction of additional levee segments and/or flood walls in unprotected areas, and the addition of pumps and gated structures. The channel improvement plan, which was the NFI Rankin Hines preferred plan that was presented in the report, consists of excavation to increase the channel capacity, demolition of the existing weir that's near the JH fuel water treatment plant, and construction of a new weir. That new weir would have a flow gate and a fish passage. That new weir would be located further downstream, and we'll show that up in the study map. They also proposed locations for placement of excavated material, upgrading of existing non-federal levee to federalize it to a ring levee around the Savannah Street wastewater treatment plant. Next slide. Since that report submittal, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Rankin Hines are working collaboratively on our new report that will provide a comparison of flood risk management alternatives. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is going to be the lead author of preparing the draft environmental impact statement that will identify the National Economic Development Plan as discussed, compare the level of flood protection provided by that plan to the level of flood protection provided to all the alternatives being assessed. Additionally, the report is going to look at the downstream impacts and see if there are any in the Pearl River Basin. The comparison of plans will not only include the non-federal interest Section 211 final plans, it's also include the additional plans, which includes revised non-structural plan that will likely include elevation of structures as well as flood proofing. And then we talked about the combination thereof, so there's going to be other plans that will be assessed. The combination of could be a combination of the channel improvement plan, maybe a non-structural plan. There's other possibilities based on the feedback and built upon historical information. The report, again, is not going to make a recommendation. Rather, it's going to provide a comparison of alternatives. So the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works may decide on a range of flood risk management options. Next slide. So we talk about the study area. So the Pearl River watershed is huge. It's over 8,000 square miles. Where we are authorized and focused on for this study area is going to be between River Mile 270, which is just south of Richland, Mississippi, to River Mile 302 to the north, which is where the Ross Barnett Reservoir Dam is located. So that is the area and its associated tributaries right adjacent, or where we are trying to achieve the flood risk reduction. Next slide. So as mentioned about comprehensive benefits, also up here is areas of interest. So there's several area interests that have been preliminary identified and are listed on the slide. This is where we're looking for public feedback as well regarding the areas of interest, ones that we don't have listed, and maybe additional new information, and your feedback on the ones that have been identified. Those that have been identified in addition to flood risk are water supply, water and wastewater treatment, ecosystem and environmental impacts, existing waste sites, cultural resources, transportation, downstream impacts, recreational access and opportunities, community impacts, and economic opportunities. But this list is not limited. All right, Colonel Klein.
Thanks, Leslie. And so that takes us to where we are today. And the technical team's work continues. We're here today to receive your feedback that we can then also include in the final report. We'll also answer any questions that we know the answers to at this point. Otherwise, we are committed to getting back to you. There'll be multiple opportunities to review the work that's being done. By the end of August, we intend to complete a draft report with a final report due in December. And that draft report, again, going out for review so that we have open transparency through this process. And then in January, that's when the Secretary is scheduled to review all work done at this point and then render his decision. As you can see, this is a really streamlined timeline. And we'd like to thank the Assistant Secretary's office for guiding us through this process, keeping us focused on getting the work done, because what we ought to be cognizant of that we are building on years of work, many years of work up to this point. Now's the time to put a bow on it and deliver some flood risk management to the city of Jackson. If you have any further comments at this point, we'll turn it back over to our moderator. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you, sir, ma'am. Okay, so kind of going back to what we first talked about, we are here to collect feedback. We're here to collect input from you folks. And so I mentioned there are several ways to do this. The email is up there. We're going to leave this slide up as people are coming up and discussing. But there's the email address, there's the physical address. Like I said, there are comment cards outside, and there's actually a project website that's down at the bottom here. For you can see the information that's out there. And that, as we move along and as we get information that we can put out there, we will update that project website. So with that, if you would you bring the house lights up, please? And we are going to begin collecting some feedback from you, the audience. So I would just ask, there are microphones here on either aisle. If you would come up, please wait for me to recognize you. We'll get you going, let you ask questions. Try to limit them to 3 minutes for your question and input. And then if for some reason we run out of time, we basically got a 2-hour window, so I'm looking at about 1:35 now, so we're good till about 3 o'clock. If anybody still has not had the opportunity to provide your input, there are multiple ways to do it, like on the screen. We would love for you to catch somebody outside and talk. So with that, we're adjourned. The mics should be hot, so if you've got questions, I would just ask that you please come up. And, yep.
Tom, I want to let people know on the board out front, there's a QR code you can scan with your cell phone that will take you to the project web page. So you don't have to type in the whole thing, just scan the QR code.
There we go. technology at its best. So,
To let everybody know, I'm going to upload this presentation to the website, hopefully Thursday night. So you'll have that to look at more closely.
okay, questions? Sir, if you don't mind, tell us your name and where you're from. And
Sure, Drake Lamont, I live in Slidell, I live by you, which is down here. First of all, thanks for coming in person and giving us an opportunity to ask a question. It makes a big difference to all of us. I know you've been there. I know on your slides, you know, basically all things you're considering. 90% of this audience probably just cares about downstream mitigation of flooding. We're already seeing on all the pearls, all the branches of the pearls, a dramatic increase in flooding over the last 3 years. Now, let's call it flooding or not flooding, as in a described event, but you know, historically, at least in my short time here compared to some other people that are probably here, 25 years in the same location. 20 years ago, or year 1 through 20, probably saw water over my dock and seawall other than tropical storm or hurricane or that, you know, once every 15-year flood that we got like 5 years ago. Hardly ever. I mean, you know, usually 11 months and 2 weeks a year, not an issue at all. And then we have storm season. In the last 3 years, probably see water over the dock for at least 3 months, March, April, and May. So and I asked a couple other guys if they agreed with the statement. They did. Probably in the last 3 or 4 years, March, April, May, out where we live, we're seeing a foot to a foot and a half more water we're used to seeing. So when I look it up there and I see, you know, channel widening and all those things that help with flood mitigation, means more water downstream in my interpretation. Can you address that at least and see if there's any impact down here that you foresee, either improvement, making it worse, no impact? I don't know is a good answer. We just kind of want that input.
All right, so we're going to tag team here. So thanks for that thoughtful question, and to the thank you for being here. It's what we're supposed to do. So, and I think we all appreciate that more than ever in a post-COVID world, honestly, is that you can't really see it unless you're here, and since I'm from DC, I know that's really important.
Work in DC too much, I know.
There you go. All right, love that. So first of all, love your comments. Do definitely want to get them in writing as well, right? And so you and your friends, if you have your kind of where I have seen this change, I think that's always helpful. The engineer in me appreciates that, and I want the Colonel and Leslie to talk to that as well as they see fit. But I just want to remind you too that in any analysis the Corps of Engineers done, we've always done some sensitivity to the emerging trends, right? And so everywhere we go, it's going to be upstream, downstream, tributaries, all those things. And so I think, yeah, we're going to answer that question, and we're not looking to pass water through and flood somewhere else, because that only leads to more problems for you and for more work to be done by the agency. We're going to make it as whole as we can. And so that's part of the analysis, and I'll let the Colonel talk to that.
I'll just tap onto the, before I hand it over to Leslie, the expert. So we're running we have the hydraulic model set up right now. It does include the downstream effects, and that will be part of the analysis. So, and we do have, it is a comprehensive model, both locally as well as through the downstream. Where we are technically with the modeling right now is haven't put in any of the structures or alternatives yet. That's what's forthcoming in the next couple of weeks. We should get the results on that. And we'll have a better idea of what's going on downstream. Downstream, by law, I think 1176 requires us to do it. It will be considered, and that is something that we'll have certainly in the final report.
Let's not interrupt more.
Yes,
Follow
sir.
my question. Does your modeling include any kind of surge capability for holding back water when there's tropical storm or hurricane events?
So for this model, for where our study area is, to the extent of it, it will go to the extent to the southern boundary condition. That southern boundary condition is where it's determined that there's no transferred flood risk or there's no hydraulic impact further. This one does not extend that far as to the ad circ. I don't believe, but we can verify that. So we'll verify that. But there are other models that we have that are studying the lower half of the Pearl River where that flow. But I wouldn't. But our modeling will show and determine if surge could be potentially impactful up there in Jackson.
this plan, or me first?
You go first.
Okay,
You're
so,
the expert.
thanks a lot. Appreciate the consideration about storm surge and accounting for that, and I think we can certainly add that in as part of the comprehensive benefits that we're looking at to make sure that we include and weigh that in as one of those qualitative and quantitative things that we can include in the report too. So I certainly made a note of that.
Yeah, you see the concern is that, we get a surge of water down at the same time, we're getting high tides and winds in. We're toast. In layman's terms.
Right.
Sure. I did want to just add on one little piece, which is, and this is not atypical, right, is that in terms of infrastructure that already exists, in any part of the country, we have to look at how those systems currently operate with their legislative purpose, whether it's ours or a state or a local. So in terms of holding back water, the modeling would only encompass what it's mandated to do. Now, we all know under certain extreme conditions, entities, including ourselves, have permission to operate differently to hold back water. That's unprecedented. But we start with how they currently operate. We don't make judgments about whether they can do anything different. And then we look at the sensitivity. So I think I heard that embedded in there. I just wanted to kind of hit that point out a little bit.
Okay, appreciate it, thank you.
Sure.
Yes, my name is John Kennebrew. I'm from New Orleans.
Yes, sir.
Been tracking this for quite a while. I have a particular concern about the one lake development idea. They're already advertising in the Jackson area lots. I wonder if in the National Economic Plan that you say sort of has a tendency in this, is the potential increase in value along the lake that will be created in any way attributed back to those that will be displaced, and do those displaced people have any priority on the lots at some sensible value?
So we're going to tag team again. Having not seen the advertisements you're talking about, as a fundamental matter of policy, and particularly my boss, we're not looking to make investments that drive people away from their homes in any way, shape, or form. And so we're not looking to change the demographics or who owns the land. I understand you're saying there's advertising there, and I'm not privy to where that is, but we would certainly look to understand that challenge that's emerging there. But my boss is not looking to make sure we're driving people off their land. We're looking to make sure we protect them no matter what strata they come from. And one thing I do need to mention here is this is a pretty strong priority for the administration, but my boss in particular, he is a Native American, and he feels very strongly about this issue. And so I think we're going to make sure full range of alternatives are considered, including those communities that perhaps felt either driven out or not included in the analysis.
Will there be development allowed along the created lake shore?
So I think we need to answer this question, because when you talk about specifics, I have to be careful because I don't know where you're talking about. What I would say is the outsider coming in as a matter of policy, we don't look to subsidize the development of those areas. If there's a federal project, those lands have to be encompassed, largely speaking, in title. And so we'd have to understand the issues more, and would like to know more about it, but we generally do title, not easements.
Thank you.
Try this.
Do you have anything on how we determine NED?
I will add to that, to the National Economic Development Plan, we identify that the inputs that go into it is it's calculated based on the flood risk reduction. So it's whatever the flood risk reduction benefits go to identify the National Economic Development Plan. The comprehensive benefits is another category that would be assessed and will be presented in the report for the ASA decision, the secretary. But for the identification of the National Economic Development Plan, it is what is the reduction of damages to flood risk. Reduction of damages from flooding is how it's calculated.
Done? Yeah, I'm wondering if the widening and dredging is gonna come down here also on the plan? Or is that just in that area up there?
So it's limited to we're down in the study area, talking about River Mile 270, which is about Richland, Mississippi, it could go to channel improvements all the way up to the Barnett Reservoir Dam. So that's the area of focus. So Richland, Mississippi would be the furthest south right now that the channel improvement plan.
Any plans for down here?
That would be outside this particular study area, but there are other studies that the Corps is involved in right now that are looking in down here.
One more thing, and when they open the water up in Jackson and it comes down here, what's gonna happen when they open that one up and more water comes?
So that with the hydraulic modeling that we're doing, that's going to be assessed. Every different of the different plans that are being identified, they will assess the with project and without project conditions, and it will address downstream effects. That's definitely going to be evaluated.
Okay, thank you.
So, sir, there's another, you can also reach out to probably, well, no, whichever side you're of the river on, either Representative Scalise or Representative Ezel, and ask them to ask us to look into, a potential study for doing dredging and widening and that kind of stuff down here.
Because my mom's been here since '89. In the past 3 years, her place that she was living at is completely underwater now, constantly. So that's why I was just asking that question.
That's a great question, so I appreciate it.
Please share that from the input.
Sir?
Yes. Wade Mizell, Washington Parish, Bogalusa. As far as One Lake project, as you know, Ross Barnett already holds back water. And if they build another reservoir below Ross Barnett, in order to fill that up, they will have to hold back water also. So the Pearl River is already shallow during the summer months. What's going to happen? I mean, we have trouble with flooding, but when you're in a drought, you're also going to have a problem with the river drying up if you have 2 reservoirs holding back water. So what's going to happen to us? I have a count on the canal, and so it's going to get to the point you can't even run a boat and motor on the river.
That's a very, thank you. Thank you for that. So part of the design and the plan that was proposed, and then the Rake-and-Hines report, is to include a low flow gate to try and sustain normal conditions as water is available. So when it would flow naturally by gravity through that low flow gate, so it wouldn't be hindered. It would hold it back once it reaches a certain level of height within the water column. But if the water's there, it's going to allow the new weir for it to flow, because sometimes it's dry. So not totally dry, but yeah.
Yes.
So very valid concern.
Well, we all know they're going to have priority, as far as trying to get the reservoirs full. And I do know that Georgia and Florida, kind of a scenario as far as Pearl River and the Wrigley's, Appalachian Coal oysters. Georgia, the state of Georgia, put it down on one of their freshwater rivers. And to have oysters, you need brackish water. We all know that. Well, when they put the dam up, it annihilated the oysters in Apalachicola. You go to Florida, you have Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi oysters. They destroyed that industry. My point being, you don't get the salinity. You don't get the brackish water in the Wrigley's. You're going to be destroying oysters, crabs, and so on and so forth.
No, sir, you're absolutely right. That's great, and that speaks to part of this is the environmental concerns. So the environmental concern is you're changing the salinity of the water, impacting what habitats are there, and part of our environmental impacts and the environmental impact review is ensuring that we preserve the habitat as it is. All right, and mitigate thereof. So yeah, please, Okay, then we'll look into it, sir.
Yeah, and just another thing to focus on is that the changing climate, right? Not a political term, a technical term, right? So the highs and the lows matter, and that is certainly something from my boss that is very important. He comes from Western water, right? So drought and our agency's role in that, and thinking about our projects with presuming water is going to be lower and higher. How do we think about those ranges in any investment? And so what you highlighted there, just about the low water alone, what you're already seeing is something we would want to make sure we're addressing. Are we making it worse? Are we helping it? Those kind of things. Thank you for that.
And so, sir, if you could, on the comment cards, tell us exactly where that is, so that we can take a look at where it is on the map, and then, you know, be able to do our environmental analysis on that particular area, specifically, you know, with the oysters, your canal, camp, all that kind of stuff. Thanks, sir.
Sure, okay. That's where the seals and the locks are, you know, lock 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Sir, I was just giving an update with respect to the storm surge, particularly related to hurricanes, whatever. That's the St. Tammany Parish study that's actually being done in New Orleans districts.
You're welcome. I think that one's going to be released publicly, actually, in the next few months. There are a revised release on that one.
So how are we doing today, folks? My name is Jack Sessions. I live right here in Pearl River myself. Been there for 20-something years. And I remember the day that this all came about. I was at the first meeting, I think 2013. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the number one question was, when they build this retention pond, is this going to be strictly for flood control, or is there going to be houses and lots being sold on this retention pond? Because I was very confused, and everybody else was last time we talked about it. They said we can't answer that question. We don't know if they're going to develop it, or because that's what our thing is thinking, that it's going to be to benefit somebody's pocket, not flood control. And so are they going to be able to build houses on this lake or retention pond? Yes or no?
Okay. Let me start with the highest level, and then we'll go to the actual technical level. But this is an important concept, right? I'm new to this study and have heard this a lot. And I'm going to echo what Leslie said, which is we are an engineering agency. We focus on flood risk management, navigation, water supply, those kind of things. So we are not looking to create development. We are creating opportunities for flood risk that could encompass one lake as well as other things we talked about. And if you have other great ideas, we want to hear them. But we are not proponents of creating lots that get sold to create a specific economy. If those project features encompass land, we have to encompass them in our project. And so what that broader though is the community, what a project like this could do for the broader community. I don't think that's necessarily about selling lots. It is about solidifying Jackson's economy to continue to exist, right, in a low-lying area. And that's more about the government and the city itself. But I don't know the details beyond that. So I know we're going to study this and make sure we identify it.
Right. And so when we take a look at it, it's specifically to make sure that we are implementing the flood risk management, flood risk reduction. And so, you know, what we see right now is that as the water comes in, it backs up the tributaries that are all going into that area. So our focus right now with whatever projects it is to reduce the impacts up on those tributaries. Along with that, as Ms. Colosimo mentioned, we purchase lands and gain title to lands that are required for us to manage our project, and then those become federal lands, right? Whatever project is built, whatever it may be, you can take a look at, go up along the Red River, where we have a whole bunch of levees along the Red River in Louisiana, a lot of walking community paths, and because of the protection that was provided, there is business development adjacent to those levees that were built there. So it is plausible that whatever is built, because of the level of flood risk mitigation that's provided, could result in business development. Because now it's more economically feasible to stand up a business or even a residential community because you're receiving protection.
So no residential, at this particular time, there's no kind of foresight for building residential houses and all around this lake?
That would be outside of what we study. So, what's that? And that would be, I think that would be the county that would be studying that type of stuff. So we're focused on what is the flood risk management associated with the project. Does it deliver that level of flood risk management? We will own, title and deed, those properties that are associated with the project. When you're on the dry side now, you now have land that is, like we talked about with the NED plan. So what the NED plan focuses on is now that you have this level of flood risk management, you're keeping water off of people's homes, businesses, out of industrial parks, what have you in the city of Jackson. Naturally to the point of property values, that changes the value of the property, both potentially monetarily, certainly intrinsically, if it changes how much flood insurance you have to buy. It also gives the county and the city an opportunity now to develop those areas that are no longer prone to flooding. And then how they develop those lands that are then county or private is how they would develop.
So,
but we're not studying. That's not part of our study as to what happens with those now protected lands.
So when y'all actually purchase that land, I guess the federal government, then so the question is, if there's never going to be no residential then, maybe business but not residential, right?
Not even.
So I think this is important, and we can't answer in detail, right? So we need to hear your comment, understand exactly where you're concerned about. I hear it here, but we're going to make sure it's on the record, so anything else you have to write down, hugely important. What I would say is every state and every county and we deal with in the nation, the problem is the same about who is responsible for land use, planning, and management. We will make sure that's addressed in terms of where that lies, if there's an ongoing update. We're not encouraging that, but that may be a separate related process that's going on in general and happens to encompass any future plans, including roads and all those things. So we will make sure that's encompassed in our analysis of what we know about that. But no, we are not looking to force any of those ideas. Maybe counties or parishes or whoever has your land use authority is considering that.
All right, thank you.
There are FEMA restrictions along floodways also that we have to look at.
Yeah, right. Anything in a floodway, by the way, is regulated by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and we do that in tandem with them, letting them know where those lines are, both pre and post projects. Thank you for that.
Sir?
So my concern is, how is this flood management? Can you explain that? Is it going to be operated like the Ross Barnett, or is it going to be, static level, surge? If you could help explain that, that'd be ideal.
So, do you want to start with,
Sure.
with that particular?
Well, when you excavate within the channel area, you're creating more storage. So that does create more storage, more volume that can be held. So the weir would have an underwater, low flow gate, so that would allow the water to pass through it statically. When it gets up to a certain height, it's going to hold anything back above that water column. And then when it gets to a certain height above the weir, if it were in a flood stage, it would then pass over that. But it does create more storage to hold back for flood risk reduction.
So it won't be a static level, it'll go up and down.
You get a reflection.
Yes.
So it won't be like Ross Barnett, where they just maintain 297.
I'm asking.
Right, and with Ross Barnett's a tough one to compare it to because there is a water control manual associated with Ross Barnett, so that when there is going to be a heavy rain surge up in northeast Mississippi, they can release ahead of that, so the reservoir can take more. Understanding that they maintain it at 297 so that Obie Curtis can draw water off of it, right? So there's a certain level that is always maintained in order to maintain the water supply, right, for the city. But then they can draw it up and down, to receive from northeast. So
to take out the swings that we see right now. Like I'm looking at the Columbia gauge, it goes from 16, it'll swing 7 feet. So it'll kind of moderate that, or it'll be static like the Ross Barnett, water in, water out.
So I think that's part of our
That's
analysis,
part of
right?
the
So we'd love to
analysis.
make sure we get that in a comment card from you so we capture it correctly. And then I think this is the thing, is your concern is document. That's what we want to know, what your concern is. We may not have the answers today, but we can make sure that we are clear on what we know about that analysis of that plan that was recommended by Rankin Hines. And when we go through this analysis, we may find there are some moderations that are worthy of consideration to mitigate some of those concerns. So we'll figure out there's a concern, understand it based on what you've told us, and make sure we're being as visible as we can about that, what we know and what we don't.
So I'll take that one as, essentially the question is, will the weir stabilize surge flows downstream? In particular, the Columbia gauge, the one that you were talking about.
Right, well, I have a camp at Columbia, but here in Slidell, just like everybody's saying, we're concerned about the downstream impact.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Because right now, when the Ross Barnett, when it gets up high, it gets to 298, it's coming. It is coming. And we're toast. That's all there is to it. And from a political aspect, we're thinking, well, they just maintain boat houses and the docks and all the millionaire properties that are on the Ross Barnett. We don't need another one of those lakes.
Right, that's right.
We need a retention pond and not a lake.
Appreciate you explaining that derivation there, and we'll make sure we address that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, I just have a few things to point out. Number one, we're talking about y'all are going to construct another weir. So in 1996, the United States Army Corps of Engineers built a weir. We call it the diversion at Walcott Bluff. It is at the conflux of the Pearl, where it splits into the East Pearl and Holmes Bayou. So you built it in 1996 after you'd done all your studies and your little models. And then guess what? Instead of splitting the water 50-50 like you studied and modeled for it to do, it split the water 70-30. I'm sure y'all are familiar with that, yay or nay. So now, today, the weir is falling apart, the river's blown out on both sides of it, and guess what you say now? We have no money to fix it. Okay, so then we have a canal. We have a canal between lot 1, 2, and 3. My grandfather helped build it, started in 1935. Now our lock structures and the levees on the canal is falling apart. So I guess I'm struggling with why we should listen to y'all and your studies and all these reports, and you come in here and you build something else that you can't guarantee is going to work like it should, no different than the diversion at Walkeye. And then you have, if you do build something and it messes up something, you don't have the money to fix it. So I just think that instead of building more things, that the United States Army Corps of Engineers should take care of what they've already built in the Pearl River Basin, instead of constructing more problems in the basin. That's number one. Number two is you're talking about widening a channel within your study area. How many miles is your study area?
So the focus area would be 270 to 302 for the river miles.
Okay, so 200 something of a 414 mile long river.
No, 207 to 302, so approximately about,
A little under 30, around 30.
2/3.
No, 30 by 30 mile.
Okay, regardless. Okay, so I'm not an engineer like you people, but I do have a lot of common sense. And I do believe that unfortunately, once you go through college so many years and you become engineers, you forget things like common sense. My father was a ditch digger for St. Tammany Parish. My son is a ditch digger for St. Tammany Parish. Imagine the Pearl is a 414 mile long ditch, okay? The ditch is clogged up, the ditch is full of debris, the ditch is silted in. We have serious stream bank erosion that's just silting the river in. We have the 4 guys back here that's pushing for the project. I had the opportunity about 8 years ago to bring them on the Pearl out of Lock 1. They rolled up their pants and they pushed my boat out of the canal and back in the canal because we didn't have enough water to navigate the Pearl. We took a paddle and we stuck it down in the middle. It was 2 foot deep here at Pearl River. So if you have a ditch and the northern miles of the ditch isn't draining properly, you don't go up there and you dig that ditch bigger. You go below where that problem is and you clean out that ditch, and you're going to realize that the ditch up here then is going to flow better. It's common sense. doesn't take millions of dollars worth of studies. It doesn't need all these engineer reports. The Pearl is nothing but a big ditch, and down here, the big ditch is stopped up. Unfortunately, y'all don't come down here and clean it. The last time it was dredged, or even any of the debris picked up out of it, was in the 70s. If you look, we used to have West Middle, Peach Lake cutoff. You can look since Katrina, and you can see where runout streams off of the West Pearl is completely silted in and doesn't flow anymore. And that's why you have the gentleman over here that says he's seeing 3 foot more water, April, May, and March, whatever you say, and the water's sitting and slide out. That's why, because the Pearl is a mess down here. So I just think that it's kind of dumb. And I want y'all to put your degrees aside, look at a common sense logic that you don't clean this part of a ditch and expect the whole thing to flow better. If you came down here and if you cleaned the ditch, then of course Jackson would flow better. Last, my third thing is, why are you going to build a flood control structure when you have the Ross Barnett Reservoir? The Ross Barnett Reservoir was not built as a flood control structure, and it is not operated as one. So instead of building a flood control structure right by something that could operate as a flood control structure, why don't you do a study on that to see how that can benefit the people of Jackson? Thank you.
Yes.
So thank you, ma'am, for your comments. Yeah, an engineer, but a common sense, practical person at the end of the day, and so completely appreciate what you said. And so I'm going to let the folks here talk to the idea of the work downstream and whether we can do that. It's all for us. There's a couple things to really hit first and foremost. We are not biased towards a solution. I want to be very clear about that. My boss said that. I'm going to say it till the end of time. My job is to give him information to make a decision from. So the input you have there, I want to know more about it. I want to see it in writing so we can unpack that and make sure we address it in the report. 2, it always comes back to congressional authority, or the authority of who has the infrastructure, right? So I'm going to let these folks talk about that lower reach that you're talking about and being able to consider that in tandem. That does fall within this authority. This idea of combinations thereof. It's a question of whether the geography of our authority by Congress gives us that opportunity. If not, how can we support that in some other way? There's always something there. And then lastly, just this idea of the maintenance and new infrastructure. This is a problem nationwide in every aspect of government. And it is an issue that's been playing for over 100 years of increasing issues, and I completely appreciate the way you said that, so thank you for that.
I don't think I have anything.
Okay, good.
Just encourage comments.
No, that's fantastic. Ma'am, thank you for that. I think you're going to be my greatest advocate on the Hill. So if you could, and I'm serious, because I'm seeing this too. For me to own and maintain the Pearl River watershed and not get the funding to maintain it, it's not good for me too. I will express capability if you get your Congress people to ask me what it's going to take to fix it, and I'll tell them. That's how it works. Okay, so if Representative Ezel, Representative Scalise, if they make the Lower Pearl locks and weirs an issue, then that is absolutely something I will express capability to take on.
So the Lock 1 canal, I guess a lot of people in this room don't know that either. Right now, St. Tammany Parish and Washington Parish was just funded to do a study because y'all, through the water bill of 2018, y'all were able to sell it or transfer it to other people. So now St. Tammany Parish and different ones, so they're fixing to get rid of all the lock gates, and there's spending $660,000 to figure out what to do with it, because ultimately the Corps of Engineers built it and then you wouldn't take care of it. Thank you.
Yeah, they had lock masters.
They did? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, and they would open the locks during high water to alleviate adjustment. They had 3 locks, and they had 3 lock masters, and the Corps defunded it. And y'all don't accept responsibility because there's ongoing lawsuits, people drowning and whatnot, and that can be prevented real easy. People drowning on the seal, but anyway, y'all removed the lock masters, and now the locks are just barely cracked open with just a small water flow going through. And they could adjust, it'd go out through
Boca Chitto Refuge. And the Boca Chitto runs into the Pearl. We have two rivers, Pearl River, Boca Chitto River. And the locks, Lot 3 runs into Boca Chitto River, which also is silted in like she's talking about, and needs dredging. But anyway, they turned it over to Washington Parish and St. Tammany Parish for the maintenance of it. And of course, Washington Parish is broke. They don't have any money to put into it. St. Tammany, like she said, is funding a study on removing it. I don't know what that's going to
I'd like to put a more positive spin on my first set of questions. The reason I asked them is it may be an unintended consequence, and it's certainly not something you control at this point. But when you build these lakes, developers swoop in, the people that are displaced are displaced. Since you mentioned our congressmen and senators and so forth, as part of this national economic development plan, could it not be a funding source for the Corps to have some way to claw back the incredible rise in lakeshore property that will happen in Jackson? It's going to happen. There are people already planning and talking about it. Can't you get some of that rise in value back into your budget from these developers? That would take legislation, that would take political will. Would you back it?
So officially, we can't state we would back it, but this is what I would say, my boss would say about this issue, is just for full disclosure, as an agency, as an example, in any Corps of Engineer-owned facility where it happens to have recreation lands, we charge fees for those entries. They're pretty nominal. But those monies go back to the General Treasury. Department of Interior, every other agency, it actually gets essentially ring-fenced and goes back to offset their costs. That has been an area of perpetual interest in every secretary I have worked for with Congress and has never been able to get it across the finish line. There is some bill being passed right now, I don't recollect what it's called, I can let you know about that. That's basically the idea you're talking about. This is a really tough one. We can't officially support or not support things, but we can say we see value in what you're talking about.
What's the schedule for this thing to pop up at?
This thing, in terms of report, the draft report would come out in September. And so this is why we wanted to get this process going now. We have technical work underway. And so we want to make sure we have good ideas. And thank you for that question, because I did want to come back to some of these options people are talking about. Remember, we talked about the combination thereof. So some of these other ideas, we want to make sure we're recording, both for what they are and what we heard, and also seeing if there's a combination thereof plan that exists that we can put forward for the Secretary's consideration. Again, we're not biased to any one plan. I guess, and then the only other thing I would offer is that in my own experience over decades of doing this as well, is that, you know, this whole idea of this, what a community does with their land with these investments and how they think about it from a community standpoint, that's hugely important here, right? What's the community benefiting from now in terms of minimizing those damages, and what's the opportunity therein? Some communities do things around recreation lands and public access and those kind of things that I've heard and read things about over time that are always good ideas, right? So I think we want to hear what your good ideas are so we can capture them in this analysis.
This is kind of sidetracking what y'all's study is. I just had a question off to the side is, how is the state of Mississippi allowed Jackson and Hattiesburg to dump millions of gallons of untreated raw sewage into the Pearl River?
Why don't we just take that question for the record, sir?
Thank you.
Well, it's ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
A
Yes, my name is Howard Page. I'm from Gulfport, Mississippi, but I have a lot of family that lives on the Pearl River here in St. Tammany. And I'd like to follow up on an issue that the lady before me just raised about sedimentation and silting on the river, and how that's been a chronic problem for the last few years. There's a lot of places on the river which may be outside of the study area. I don't know if y'all have looked outside of the 40 miles that you're presently looking at, and if you can come down here and look much further downriver and look at the effects here, if it's possible to expand your study area and to do it before September when your report is actually going to come out. But my question is, are you aware that the silting has been going on, that it's been a chronic condition? And are you aware that it's continuing? In other words, when you finish your study and put a ribbon on it, as you said, the silting is going to continue. So whatever set of conditions you end up with, you have to understand that you're not addressing the sand and gravel mining and the stream shore destabilization that's happening, that's constantly causing really bad silting down here. And is your study looking at that? Are you aware that there's been a real increase in silting down here, and that there's going to continue to be? And does your study take that into account? And then also, are you planning on expanding this area down here in St. Tammany and Hancock County to include your study area before you're publishing in September?
As far as the study area, downstream impacts are going to be assessed. In regards to sedimentation, we do have the potential to do a sediment transportation modeling or assessment. So please provide that feedback and comment, because that is a potential. I'm not 100% sure if we are including that, but if you get the feedback, we'll definitely take it under advisement for suggestion. As far as looking into the level of detail within the Pearl River down here, for any impacts that would be caused from a with project condition, yes, that's going to be assessed. But as far as what's already here and in place, I'm going to refer you to the St. Tammany study, because some of the stuff would be things that are ongoing here. The St. Tammany study that the Corps is currently doing and going to re-release, that one is focused and includes the Pearl River. Yeah, we can connect you. It's actually, there is the public website for the New Orleans District of Corps of Engineers does have listed on there the St. Tammany study with the fact sheet information and the public. And before we leave here today, can we get them the information on the website? Can we share that in the back room?
I think the silting on that river, it's a major problem. I watched in 2017 or 18 for 3 straight weeks them cleaning up the mouth of the Bloom Bayou, the barges and long arm, extended arm track hose. And I ran that river doing swamp tours. And right behind that project they had, in less than 2 months, in less than 60 days, the Bloom Bayou was filled back in with silt. And that's a fact. It was scary. Within 2 months, I ran that river every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Honest to God. Yep, and now my son runs it every single day. We never stopped with the swamp tours. And within 2 months, the bloom was filled back in. And that's God's truth. Yep. And sat there and watched it.
And to be clear, it sounds like that hasn't been a part of the study, that understanding that the silting, as far as this particular study, that as you look at downriver effects, I don't think you've understood the condition that there's been a huge increase in silting and a continuing silting problem here. That doesn't seem to be a condition that you're aware of.
We're working on understanding the conditions right now as part of our assessment. So, but your feedback is going to make us, if you get a written comment and so forth, it will be something that we'll put as a part of the public comment record and look into.
I don't understand why you didn't take this study, or I intend for the study to go on down to the Gulf of Mexico. That would just, the whole all the way from start to finish.
Yeah, so the Corps of Engineers is perhaps the most misunderstood and biggest different agency from any other federal agency. And the main issue is that we don't have germane authority and appropriation to do what we see fit in terms of the management of any region in the country, largely speaking. And what that means is we have to have existing authorization to do something in a geography, and it's usually a specific geography, and associated appropriation to do that. And so we have this segregated problem, but it starts with your point. It's we don't have necessarily an ability to expand an existing congressional declaration to do an analysis beyond the geography that's identified. I think that's one of the reasons we got the 1176 direction to make sure we were doing downstream impacts, that the flood risk management problem being studied was really localized in the Pearl in some sense compared to what we're talking about here. Now that doesn't mean that it is encompassed in this other analysis that I'm unfamiliar with, and so we're going to do our homework on that. We just don't have that germane authority.
Hey, folks, I would just ask if you've got a question, the people that are online would like to hear as well, and we are trying to record this, so if you would please use a mic. Sir, I do have a little bit of knowledge on the navigation thing.
Oh. Okay, so I just have one question. You keep saying that there's a study going on for the Lower Pearl done by the New Orleans district. Why are they doing the study on the Pearl if the Pearl is in the Vicksburg District?
The Pearl River terminates in, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so it's because, it's mostly because we've regionalized our study planners, and they all operate out of the New Orleans district. So by matter of proximity, from here to the New Orleans district is about an hour and a half drive. From the city of Jackson, it's an hour drive from Vicksburg.
I understand that, but if you're the authority of the Pearl, why would you give the funding and give the study to another district?
So,
I think, and I guess, and you don't even have to answer because I know your answers are vague, but the problem with the Pearl is, from day one, is the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. And I think that having the New Orleans district do a study on the Pearl isn't helping the real problem when the Vicksburg district is who is supposed to be over the Pearl. Thank you.
So let me take one quick moment with respect to navigation. I mean, that's the reason that we have locks and dams on the Pearl River, right? Is that it was constructed for navigation. Back in the mid-70s, we dredged and there was traffic. It was predominantly barge traffic, but other things. But we did do dredging and it was maintained. And in the 70s, we were enjoined by the EPA to do manure dredging. We were not able to continue that mission. And guess what happens when you've got a navigation mission and the navigation traffic starts to fall off and you start to build up sediment, then nothing goes forward. They physically couldn't move any more barges. And so they were light and loading the barges, and then basically it fell off. So that's the reason that there's no more navigation on the Pearl. Did that help a little bit?
That led to the disposition?
Oh, and that ultimately led to the disposition of the project in terms of a navigation project. That's what it was originally constructed for. And so there is no more maintenance dredging.
Thank you.
You said there was no more maintenance dredging?
Yes, sir, by the Corps of Engineers.
On Pearl River down to West Pearl River, there's no dredging, but on East Pearl, up to the Mississippi test site, there is still dredging there. Anyway, I have a question for you. In 1983, Pearl River went up as high as it's ever been in recorded history. And they had to open up the dam up, I guess, in the Ross Barnett, which flooded everything down here. Everything got flooded. And I'm just wondering, I understand that there's been some kind of limits put on what water levels they can keep in the Ross Barnett. That I don't know about, but that's what I've heard. Can this project, this one lake project, tie this whole thing in together and we can wind up with another flood like that in '83?
Certainly take that.
Yeah, again, so appreciate you raising that and writing it down for us. But generally speaking, I mean, dams have, without talking about Ross Barnett specifically, dams do have a way they operate by authority or convention. This is a private dam, so we don't have any jurisdiction over that. But how they operate under extreme duress would lead to a condition like you described under 83, unprecedented conditions. But our analysis will look at how that's operated and I'll look at any proposal around the One Lake and how it's operated, or a proposal for levees or anything else that comes about through your suggestions and recommendations that would alleviate flood risk management. We will encompass how Roswell would be operated.
Any additional questions?
We have one more.
Hi, Stacy Ortego. I'm with the Louisiana Wildlife Federation, and we just wanted to express some concerns, and we'll also submit in writing before the deadline. So some of our concerns are really with wildlife species. Some people also mentioned concerns about oyster, shrimp, crab with the low flow. They also mentioned in the summer with the flow that's already lower, there are folks that can't already or having trouble with those water levels, and so there's concerns about that being impacted even more. And from what you're saying about the sediment transport study, are you saying that that has to be requested by people in writing before you can actually do that? I'm not sure why that wouldn't be part of a study that you're submitting for comments later.
No, I just would want your comments documented about what you're asking for. We are looking at downstream impacts in totality, and so I think that this is more just another way for us to make sure we're capturing it. And that's why we're doing
Understood.
this.
Yeah, we'll make sure we have that in writing as well. And there's also some concerns with the toxic waste sites that are in this project area. If I'm not mistaken, I think someone said there's about $8 million set aside to deal with any kind of cleanup. That doesn't seem very adequate, so I would just make sure if that's the right amount or not, that you're making sure that if there would be negative impacts, that that there is an adequate amount of money to handle that. With 8 sites, $8 million would not be enough. And I would also point out that the American Rivers has listed the Pearl River as number 3 on their 10 most endangered rivers in the United States. This is the second time since 2018 that this has been put on their list, and that is because of this project and the potential negative impacts from it. There's also concerns with the sediment availability. Any wetlands that we already have, we need to maintain. So destruction of any wetlands and bottomland hardwood forest. Any cypress trees, mature growth cypress trees that are lost cannot be mitigated for. When they're gone, they're gone. It would take years and years to fix those impacts. And then there's always the concern that mitigation is not happening in the area where the impacts are happening. We've had those comments before on projects with that issue. Sometimes there's not even enough mitigation bank credits in an area. So I would just stress those concerns. And in addition, wildlife impacts to there's 2 endemic species of turtle, the ring sawback turtle and the Pearl River map turtle. There's also Gulf sturgeon, which is a threatened species that we're concerned about. And then you have different bird species like clapper rail, thorn-tailed warbler, and several other species. This river is one of the most biodiverse in the nation, so we want to make sure that the integrity of that is intact. So we'll submit some of those in writing, but thanks for meeting with us here today.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Juan Fernandez. I am from Jackson, Mississippi, and I just couldn't wait to